Hi, my name is Carlo Volpe,
And I'm Desmond Silva,
and
and
welcome to
welcome to
Centerville
Centerville
Voice.
Voice.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Centerville Voice. My name is Carlo Volpe, and my good friend Desmond. How are you, Des?
Okay, how about you, Carlo?
I'm great, Des. Thanks so much. And everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for all your subscriptions and your likes. And thanks for hitting the notification bell. If you haven't already, please do on YouTube. You'll get notified every time we have a new episode. So, folks, this is episode number 17, and we're going to continue on our series on the Bible. Last episode was episode 16, and we talked about the 10 Commandments. So let's get right back into it, Des. This part, I guess the next section of the Bible we want to talk about specifically is slavery. It's one of those issues that's tossed around every single day and thrown around for good reason. It's terrible things that happen, but there's a lot of different nuances within slavery. And I want to talk about that, but I want to talk about how the Bible refers to it, and because the Bible is one of those things that people use as a weapon on either side of the argument, right? So
Yeah.
let's get into it. What's your take on slavery in the Bible? I mean, if you can kind of intro that.
Well, slavery in the Bible, of course, there were two forms of slavery, and the Bible does tell of both types of slavery. First type, the one type of slavery, probably the first type, the most one that people these days are more familiar with, is chattel slavery. And chattel slavery is when someone is kidnapped and or they're uh, thrown into slavery against their will. They're like, let's say someone who is well off is kidnapped by pirates or by slave traders or whoever, or by anyone, and then sold to someone else as if they're a piece of property.
Okay.
And that's what chattel slavery is. And this is what a lot of the Afro-American community's ancestors would have gone through, like centuries ago, before they had the Civil War, right? And before they had the freeing of the slaves.
Mhm.
So in that case, that was where he had the Ethiopian Empire would have gone to war with other African nations.
Okay.
They would have taken prisoners of war, so and then sold them off to other nations, including the Europeans and the Americans, right?
Okay.
Particularly, especially the Europeans. And or if you were to look at the Barbary slave trade, where that was back in the 1400s, where
Okay.
you had Afro-Muslim groups who were pirates, the Barbary pirates,
Okay.
and they went and basically went across Africa and Europe. The historians would say that they practically molested
Wow.
Britain along the coastline. There are writings of how common this type of slavery was with back then. Like it was like commonplace back
Okay.
then. But how about a nobleman uh, who was kidnapped by the Barbary slaves, by the Barbary pirates, and then ransomed off to his family, right?
Wow.
And if they didn't pay the ransom, well, then that man would have been sent off into slavery. And this was a time before Britain had its huge navy or naval power back then, and it was basically being decimated. It was very weak back then. And
Okay.
so you had these other empires, other nations that were from other continents that would basically completely take over
Mhm.
Britain, right? And
Okay.
other countries that were in Europe. So you did have people who were of Caucasian descent who were slaves for a very, very long time. It was George Washington who actually made rules to try and stop it, to basically stop the slave trade, to stop the Barbary slave trade, because it went from it lasted for over 400 years,
Wow.
right? From the 1400s all the way through to 1800s, they had the Barbary slave trade that was there. And
Okay.
even before that, they were having slave trading going on throughout the entire world.
Okay.
The second type of slavery is indentured slavery. And
Okay.
this is a slavery that was very common, especially in Europe and also in the Middle East. Um, this was when you had someone who had fallen into debt. Usually they would have made bad life choices or made bad financial course choices, or maybe their family fell to disaster. A good example, let's say, is if let's say a family lost the father, the head of the family, when the children were still too young and left mother, that the children semi-orphan and the mother was widowed. Back then, most women would have been destitute under those types of conditions and would have eventually gone into slavery. Should the family have been in debt and without the primary breadwinner there to actually pay off the debt, well, now mom and kids have to pay off that debt. There was no form of bankruptcy that you could claim back then.
Yep.
We're talking about like 1400s and way before that, all the way up to like 1800s, even before the 1900s, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this was a very long time that this happened. And the difference was that,
just to interrupt for a second, I think that's a good point to kind of remind everybody that's listening and watching that that this was common, and it seems to me like this is almost equivalent to today's debt, where a lot of people are living in debt or trying to almost drowning in the paying the debt collectors and all that stuff. So before there were credit cards, before there were these don't pay for 16 months and all that stuff, there was another way to live in debt, and this seems like that. I mean,
exactly. And but the thing is that back then, people understood that it was human labor and it was servitude that was the most valuable thing to most of these affluent people, right?
Okay.
When you're rich and you have all the money in the world, what are you going to want to make your life a little more easier? Well, have someone else do your work for you, right?
Yeah.
You look at most rich people today. How many rich people do their own taxes? Probably none.
No.
They hired an accountant, right?
Yeah.
How many rich people do their own laundry? Probably very few.
Yeah.
They have a maid.
Hard work. Yeah, the list goes on for sure.
This goes on, gardeners and all that stuff. But instead of indentured slaves, we have employees, right? Mm-hmm. That's what it is. And the only difference between the employee and the indentured slave is that the employee works in the black in terms of credit, in terms of how much funds that they have. They don't owe money. They're trying to earn money, whereas the indentured slave is working in the red. They owe money, and they have to basically pay it back
to get out of the debt.
Exactly, and honoring the debt. And this goes according with the Bible's commandment, where it says, "I am the Lord thy God." You shall not take the Lord's name in vain. Yes. Right? You take the Lord's name in vain, you're breaking an oath, right? Okay. And if your oath was that you were going to pay a certain amount of money for something that you purchased from someone else and you can't pay, well, instead of breaking the oath, it's better for you to keep the oath and pay it off by being the other person's servant, right?
Interesting. So in that regard, your oath, do not take the Lord's name in vain, was don't go against your words that you swore to pay this debt or what have you, right? And you took the word to God for that debt.
Exactly.
So that's what the connection.
Mm-hmm. So it was basically it was people being honorable and all that stuff. And you get a lot of people these days who, the big difference between back then and now is that now we have bankruptcy.
Yes.
So there are more and more people going into debt likely these days than we probably had back then. Because of some little thing called bankruptcy. You can always claim bankruptcy or insolvency, and you get a black mark on your credit, which means that you're no longer able to get, you're less likely to get credit from creditors, right?
Yeah.
The downside to that is that if you can't obtain the necessary, necessities that you need to live, such as food, clothing, and a roof over your head, well, you'd end up dying or even starving or getting sick or something like that, and your survival rate goes down, right? But in those days, if you're an indentured slave, you were better off because you had a roof over your head, clothes on your back, and you had food in your belly. Okay, and there are a lot of statements in the Bible about how masters should treat their slaves. Ephesians 6:9 says, Masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours in heaven, meaning God, and there is no favoritism with him. So basically treat your slaves fairly. It's basically what this says. Exodus 21:2. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years, but the 7th year he shall go free without paying anything. Right.
Oh.
So they were agreeing.
Like
That was
term
basically
limits.
saying, okay, if this guy can't pay his debt after 7 years, okay, then that's it. You know, he's worked his butt off, and if you don't want to let him, you have to let him go free after this point. And some of the people who were indentured slaves were actually sold into slavery as in order so that their creditor would be able to gain their money back from whatever they did. So that was common for them to be sold into slavery as an indentured slave. And there are many different statements there. Like, for instance, there is Galatians 3:28. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male or female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. So there are many statements that are in regards to that. And on top of that, let's see here. There's on how to, for instance, in Deuteronomy 24:7, if someone is caught kidnapping a fellow Israelite and treating or selling them as a slave, the kidnapper must die. So this is the chattel slavery. You must purge the evil from among you. In Deuteronomy 23, verse 15, if a slave has taken refuge with you, do not hand them over to their master. Right. So if they're seeking refuge, because if they're seeking refuge, that means that they're likely being mistreated. Yeah. So if they're being mistreated, then of course, if you give them back, if they're being mistreated by the master, if you give them back to the master, they're going to be mistreated yet again. So that's not how it should be done. The master should be, first of all, treating them nicely, treating them properly like a human being, and making sure that they just pay off their debt. Whereas in the case, but if the master is mistreating them, well, that's not part of the deal, right?
You know, and maybe it's me, but through growing up, I got to tell you, every time I heard the term slave at all, whether it was in the Bible, whatever, I automatically assumed the worst. And it's only like after, uncovering it or reading more into it, right, and getting a little older and wiser, that you realize that the term indentured slave, slave, is completely different than the
chattel slavery.
Yeah, and the evilness that comes with the other type of slavery, right? Like, even it's in the Bible saying go against it, or so it's. I don't know. I don't even know what I'm trying to say, I guess, but it's so valuable, I think, for me to separate the difference, because even in the Bible, I can see them saying, something like everybody's equal under God's and, in God's eyes, and everybody's free in God's eyes, which truly still means your soul is free. Your spirit is free, even if you still have to work for a boss, which is equivalent to today, right? Our consciousness is free. Our soul is free, even if we still have to work for our $1 million mortgage. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Okay.
So, and then it says the only ones that we should be truly servants to is to God, right? But then Jesus takes it further that we're not merely servants, we're children of God, right?
Children,
the children of God rather than his servants. So if we're now the children of God, of course, more is expected out of them than the servants.
Yes.
So there is a statement for most Christians, right? Those who do not know God and defy God. So for those who do not know God, very little is expected. But for those who do know God, much is expected, right? So,
well, and you can see that even this kind of analogy to a child, or like your children yourself, or growing up, is like, well, when you know better, more is expected of you.
Exactly. More is expected out of a 10-year-old than it is out of a 4-year-old, right?
Yeah. And rightfully so.
Know more about that, right?
Yeah. So how do we take, maybe some of those lessons to today? Because, the topic of slavery comes around every once in a while, right? And it's we only look at it in the past, but can we make some kind of connection to today and to religion?
Well, in terms of today, but for instance, a lot of people, Bill Maher included, right? I agree a lot. There are a lot of things I agree with Bill Maher, and there's some stuff that I don't agree with. Bill Maher, of course, is a heavy atheist, very not just atheist, but anti-religion, almost in a way, to the point where he likes to push down the Bible a lot. He likes to push down the Old Testament, the New Testament, or almost any form of religion. But one of his main targets is the Christian Bible. And one thing he has made a statement before was that Jesus thinks that slavery is okay. But the thing is, he treats it as if Jesus thinks that chattel slavery is okay, which is extremely incorrect.
And that's what I was trying to say, is that difference, to tease out the difference, is so important. They may sound like the same words, right? But they're very, very different, to the point where that gets conflated and that gets used, and they're often cheap shots. Like, well, I like Bill Maher as well, and I used to be a big fan of his in the past. But one of the things I don't like about him is oftentimes very cheap shots that you can't really defend against. These cheap shots are like, oh, well, they believe in the Bible. You know what I mean? To cover anything that would be.
Yeah. Well, technically you could, but it takes a lot. The thing is, it's easy to take a cheap shot. It's easy to take a cheap shot. But the thing is, it takes, to be able to make a proper statement, it takes a lot of digging and a lot of evidence to back it up. A solid statement has a lot of backing behind it. Cheap shots don't.
Exactly.
So if you want to be able to, the thing is, if someone takes a cheap shot at you, it is more difficult to be able to rebuke that or rebut it, because of the fact that it takes longer to explain it. Right?
Well, exactly. And oftentimes a cheap shot has so much misinformation in it already, right? Or so much assumed incorrectness, I guess, or incorrect that's used as a weapon, when really oftentimes say, well, if we have the time to explain something, we'll show you how wrong somebody is. But no, I think this is a good reminder as well for me just the idea that, like, it's not just what you read on a piece of paper. Its context is important, and what the times they were in as well, and things like that. But yeah, it's one of those things that the Bible oftentimes gets labeled as, oh, it's out of date. It's 2,000 years or however 1,000 years old, or but a lesson's a lesson, right?
Yeah, a lesson is a lesson, and whether it's 2,000 years old or not, whether the Bible is correct or incorrect, the Bible typically, for the vast majority of the time, is very much correct when it comes to, like, with the teachings of Jesus, or many of the other teachings that are there in Acts of in Deuteronomy and the Psalms, and there's a lot of wisdom that's in there.
Yeah.
But the problem is, there is always somebody who's going to misinterpret the Bible. And it's even mentioned in the Bible that there are people who will misinterpret the Bible. A good example is when Jesus was in the desert for 40 nights and 40 days. So Jesus, for the 40 nights and 40 days that Jesus was in the desert, he was tempted by the devil. And the devil literally used the Bible. He quoted the Bible in order to try and make Jesus listen to him, right? The main thing was that Jesus, his part of this task, one of his missions, was to get through this 40 days and 40 nights in the desert, where he had hardly any food at all. Like, he fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, right? Wow. And what there was, after some time, the devil came to him, and he said to him, "You are the Son of God, are you not? You are the Messiah, right? Turn these stones to bread." Now, Jesus goes back to his son and says, the Bible also states, man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God, right? He showed Jesus all the kingdoms that the devil had control of.
Okay.
So at that time, the devil had control over many, many kingdoms. You could say the ones that were doing child sacrifice, for instance, would have been a very good example of the kingdoms that were controlled by the devil. Which was very common back then, right? The devil said, if all of this will be yours, if you just bow your head and worship me, right? And Jesus said, the Lord thy God, he said, you shall not worship anyone but the Lord thy God. I am the Lord thy God, there shall have no other God before me, the very first commandment, right? The Bible says this. Then that devil takes him up to a high place on the temple, and he says to him, throw yourself from the top of the temple, for it says in the Bible that the angels of the Lord will not allow you to even dash your foot against a stone, right? Being the Son of God, right? And he says, away with you, Satan, for this, it says, and now I'm getting this, might be getting these in the order wrong, but eventually he says, it also says that you should not put the Lord God to the test, right? In the Bible, right? And then it says, then he rebukes Satan and sends him away. So Satan runs away. Eventually, there are some angels that come and they bring Jesus to safety, and they serve and wait on him at that time. After this was at the end of the 40 days time, right? So this would have happened over a few weeks' time that these temptations occurred. But it shows that even the devil would quote the Bible, right? And there are many other instances in the future where the devil tried to use, what people thought would be what God would want against them in order to pervert the word of God, right? Or pervert the Bible, or pervert the teachings of Jesus, or pervert the teachings of the prophets, or the teachings of God himself. So there's so to see then that during the times of, before the Civil War in the United States, to see that there were slave traders and slave owners using the Bible to try and pervert the whole purpose of the Bible, right? And misinterpret it, it shouldn't be a surprise.
Yeah.
I mean, it was said that it was shown that something like this could happen almost 2,000 years before that. And they're doing it even today.
I was going to say they're bound to repeat themselves if it's an eternal force that, if the devil or evil is eternal force, then it's not going to go away. It's essentially, right? I mean,
it's going to keep coming. It's going to keep on happening over and over and over again. Bill Maher's doing it. He also did that with slavery. There are many people who will twist and pervert the Bible for their own purposes.
And I think it's maybe valuable to say that, like, if there is a devil and if there is, devil's work and God's work and everything, I think sometimes people do devil's work without even knowing they're doing it. And I think somebody like maybe Bill Maher, I'm not specifically saying he's doing devil's work, but if something like, what he's trying to do by being funny, by being politically funny, I don't know. I wonder if, like, without even having to, there's a neutral ground, I guess what I'm saying. You don't have to necessarily attack. You could also be neutral. And part of his career is that he's attacking, because that's what he does.
He's like, he part of his career, he's basically, he's a comedian, and he has his own views, and he does, and there are times where he has perverted the Bible and misinterpreted it in order to support his particular views, right?
Yeah.
So and that's commonplace with a lot of people, both today and well over 2,000 years ago, right?
Yeah.
It's happening for millennia, right? So to think that that we've changed greatly in that in terms of wisdom, right? And in terms of being able to understand the wisdom of the ancients or wisdom of our ancestors, to think that we've actually progressed is a great, beyond that is a great deal of hubris.
Yeah.
That we had to have a very great deal of hubris in order to believe that that's the case. That again goes to the original sin, which was the sin of pride. Right, and bringing Adam and Eve, right? If you look at the book of Genesis, the original sin was not disobedience; it was a sin of pride, right?
So symbolic eating the apple is an action of pride.
It was an action of pride, and because of the fact that
you wanted the knowledge.
Let's put it this way: God says to you, "You can eat of any fruit in the tree, any fruit at all." And including the tree of life, which gives you eternal life. As long as you eat that fruit over and over again, you live forever, right? And you live blissfully forever young, never have.
Except one tree, though, you can't eat.
Say what?
Except you can't eat from one tree.
Yeah, so you can't eat from one tree, the tree of knowledge of good and bad, right? The one tree. So what that represents is the eating of the fruit represents man's fall from innocence. Right? Or the human race's fall from innocence, as eating of the truth. Because when you're a small child, you don't know the difference between good and bad. And everything is almost like paradise for you. If you're lucky enough to be born into a good family, right?
Now we need to have an episode on this, because that's very, very, it's up for interpretation, right? What the apple, and what does it mean? Or I could even question, what would be the whole purpose of having that tree there, right?
Yes, it's basically it's symbolism. But the thing is, if you look at
Like a test.
what did
Lots
the
of
devil
tests.
do? Yeah, what did the serpent do in order to get Eve to eat from the tree? He made it tempting to her, made it desirable. It says, "Oh, if you eat of the tree, you will have the knowledge of good and bad, and you will be like God."
Yeah.
Right? You'll be like God. And then that's when Eve, her eyes open, and she's like, "Oh, okay, I really want this apple," right?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of women who are going to think that's sexist and all that stuff because it's the woman who ends up doing it. But from my experience, from what I know, from personal experience, from what I know, is that women always want what they can't have. If you make it something that they can always have, if you make it something readily available for them, they don't care about that. They want what they can't get.
I don't know if I can even comment on that one.
I'm not gonna, but the thing is, it's
No,
not.
but it's interesting,
It's
right?
been said by comedians like David Chappelle. It's been
Yeah,
said by Chris Rock. It's true. It's true. It's not that not every woman is like that.
No,
Not
no,
everyone. I'm not saying that every woman is, but a lot of them are like that, and that's why they have the old saying, "Vanity, thou art woman." Right?
Yeah.
That's another old saying, and this is due to certain types of things. Now there are men who are like that too.
Of course. Yeah, of course. And I was just about to say, I mean, there's times in my life where I went through some ridiculous moments up and down for sure. Yeah, no, that's interesting because like, the whole falling from grace thing, right? It's a big discussion. We definitely need an episode on that.
That's something else that we had to develop them. But essentially, it was the sin of pride that caused them to fall, right?
Okay.
But and so that sin of that pride also leads to, because that's pride is what eventually leads to other things like misinterpreting the Bible, thinking that you're more wiser than your elders who went before you. And I'm not saying that there are some young folks that are a little bit wiser than their elders in certain respects, but to say that you know everything is ridiculous.
And that's a notion that comes with youth as well. Oftentimes, as a youth, we get a taste of some knowledge. We get a taste of some information. Really, it's not even knowledge yet because we haven't processed it yet. But we get a taste of it, and then we kind of run with it. And that's kind of a immature kind of a way of handling information, right?
Yeah, and it can lead to a lot of embarrassment if you don't handle it properly, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So
I'll tell you. I mean, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I would have been one of those guys that would have said, anti-religion, even I would have claimed to be an atheist and claimed that I knew what I was talking about. We don't know anything. That's what I know now.
Yeah.
But that's part of it, right? Having humility to understand that we don't know, and that's why we need guidance. That's why we need elders, books, everything like that. The holy books. That's the purpose of them. That's the whole purpose.
And of course, I think one of the greatest injustices that we can do to future generations is to remove books and history from our archives and our libraries and
even our daily life. Yeah, we have to need
daily life. We're censoring these things because we don't like how it sounds. I mean, or try to rewrite history.
Yes. It's a good reminder. We are not going to be burning any books. We shouldn't be banning any books. Even those terrible, we've said this many times, those terrible ideas need to be exposed for their terribleness.
Exactly.
Yes.
I mean, you don't see many people going around, banning the Communist Manifesto.
No.
Right? Even though it was a horrible idea.
Horrible.
Right? It's a really horrible idea. But no one's saying that we need to ban it. No one's saying that we need to burn it or get rid of it completely because of the fact that it's an idea that was out there. And if someone ever comes up with that idea again, we need to show, look, this was thought about in the past. Look how this happened before.
And we literally have a manual that didn't work the first time.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's why it gets me mad sometimes with the statues and the idea. It's the same reason why we need to keep that book. Same reason why we need to keep a statue up. Because even if that statue represents some evil, let's talk about it. That's the whole idea.
Exactly. Yeah. If you have a statue, don't tear down the statue. Instead, put a plaque underneath describing what happened.
Exactly. And if it's an embarrassing story, well, that's okay. We'll be embarrassed to write it.
Yeah. That and honestly, they recently because they tore down Queen Victoria's statue. Was it right?
Yeah, and Johnny McDonald as well.
So Johnny McDonald. That was a dumb thing to do. Honestly, instead of doing that, they should have put a plaque underneath his statue.
Yeah, so that exactly. You can't.
Happened. This is the mistake. This is what he did right. This is what he did wrong.
Well, exactly. If the idea is that the history that we've been taught was incomplete, well, then let's complete it. Let's not whitewash it, or, to another term, let's not wash it with another idea, another ideology is what it is, right? Because to wipe out all the statues of our history is to erase our history, and that's what happened in China, that's what happened in North Korea, and that's what happens.
Exactly. And then what happens is they lose track of what the lessons that were learned in the past, and then what happens is now you're easier to manipulate.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, could you imagine forgetting every mistake you've ever made? Could you imagine forgetting every time you made, a little small mistake, but you learned from it, right? And you course corrected. If you can never recall those moments, or if you can never learn from your past mistakes, my God, how could we ever get better?
You'll be repeating the same mistake over and over and over and over again.
That's the definition of insanity, right?
That's what the level of foolishness is. That's the definition of being gullible and naive.
Yeah.
To think that you can do the same thing over and over and over again and get a different result after having the same result 10 times.
Like, I think Albert Einstein quoted that's the definition of insanity. He's doing the same thing over and expecting a different result. So it's exactly. So in order to get a different result, we have to have a different approach. Exactly. Learn from our history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the same thing goes for the Bible, about the slavery, about everything.
Exactly.
We need to be able to make sure that we learn from history.
Exactly. And I would encourage people too, if you're listening to this, if you're watching this and you have questions about slavery, read into it, open up a book and dive into it, and peel back the layers, because it's not all the same. If you owe money and because you can't pay that money, you now have to work. That's very different than being stolen from your house in the middle of the night and put in, shackles or whatever. It's completely different.
And I think also, and if you are going to read a book, don't read a book that has political inclinations or has some sort of narrative that they're trying to tell. Yeah. Read a history book, like an encyclopedia, that tells facts of what things actually happened. Going, like, for instance, a good example of stuff not to read is how the USA are on Vanity Fair and CNN are all calling I think the Prime Minister or President of Hungary, Orban, a authoritarian dictator, just because the hard left-wingers don't like him, because his country is a huge success story in terms of security, economy, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And the guy is right of center.
Yeah. And I actually saw an interview with him the other day, and it's going to be, I hear that's spreading in Europe. You're going to see that in Poland. You're going to see it countries like,
it's already in Poland.
Yeah. Italy, maybe soon.
And they don't like it, especially since Orban officially made, now the thing is, Orban officially made Jesus Christ the king of Hungary, and the king of, and I think Poland also did the same. No, I think it was Poland that did that also. Poland made Jesus Christ the king of Poland, and one of the two. I would double check on that, but they officially made him the king of the country. Yes, and basically erected a humongous statue of Jesus, and they had the bishops put a ceremony and all that stuff.
Wow.
And now Jesus is king of the country. So
well, and that's the beginning. I mean, it didn't just start today, obviously, but that's the rumblings. That's the beginning of a more conservative, approach that's coming out again. And it doesn't have to be a far right-wing thing, but it's like just right of center, a little bit more conservative, family values. And I heard him talking that, family values is what's important.
Yes, strong family values, like traditional family values, where the children are the focus.
Absolutely.
Children are focused. Mom and dad stick together for the kids.
Yeah. And honestly, I think that's a good way to close this up too. I mean, the Bible always talks about family values, right? I mean, the New Testament talks about it. The Old Testament talks about it. And like you said, around, I think we've said enough kind of about the whole idea of slavery, the difference of, and I don't know. I think, what do you think? Do you think we want to add anything else to today's episode?
No, that's pretty much it. We pretty much said the whole thing, buddy.
Awesome. I think that's good. Well, everybody, thanks for your feedback. Thanks. Let us know, please, what you think, your likes, share, and all that stuff. Des, again, my pleasure, man. Thank you.
Take care. We'll see you guys in the next video.
All right. Peace, guys.
Thanks for joining in and watching Centerville Voice. Remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. If you are seeing this on YouTube, make sure you click on the notifications bell so you get notified when we upload new videos, which we release every Friday. Sharing and liking our videos helps promote the channel, and sharing episodes like these helps get the word out so that more people will get to see our videos. If you like what you see and or hear, please consider becoming one of our Patreon supporters. 10% of all Patreon supporter donations we receive goes to our charity of the year. You can visit us at centervillevoice.com to learn more and engage with us on one of our social media pages. Thanks for your support, and we will see you again in our next video or podcast.